Welcome to the Joys of Binge Reading, the show for anyone who ever got to the end of a great book and wanted to read the next instalment. We interview successful series authors and recommend the best in mystery, suspense, historical and romance series, so you'll never be without a book you can't put down. You'll find this episode's show notes, a free ebook and lots more information at thejoysofbingereading.com. And now, here's our show.
USA Today best-selling author Kate Hewitt seems to have done it all. She's a busy vicar's wife raising 5 children, and between meals, so to speak, she's also found time to write more than 60 books in multiple genres, from classic romance to intensely emotional women's fiction. Hi there, I'm your host Jenny Wheeler, and today Kate talks about how life and publishing is constantly changing, staying ahead of the curve and how she does it, and the mystery in her own life that might make a story sometime. But before we talk to Kate, just a reminder that the show notes for this binge reading episode can be found on the website thejoysofbingereading.com. That's where you'll find links to Kate's books and website, as well as information on how to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. But now, here's Kate. Hello there, Kate, and welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Jenny. Great to be here.
Look, beginning at the beginning, which is where I always like to start, was there a once upon a time moment when you decided that you wanted to write fiction? And if so, what was the catalyst for it?
Well, I've always written something since I was quite small. Plays, poetry, newspaper articles. I think even since I was about 6, I always wanted to be a writer of some sort. Probably a very, very early catalyst was my brother wrote a short story and got a lot of attention for it. And so I decided I wanted to write a story too. I was about 5. And I wrote one that was one sentence long. And my father read it. And yeah, I think actually that was sort of the beginning of it all.
How amazing. And how lovely that your dad took it seriously.
He did, yeah. There's actually a joke in my family because when I was about 6, I wrote a longer story and I put a cover on it and made it very official looking. And then I wrote on the cover, by the author of The Christmas Rose, which was my first story. So everyone kind of joked that I was into marketing at a very early age.
You've got the most remarkable scope in what you write, and the uniting factor seems to be the thing that you use in your kicker line, emotional stories in a number of genres. And you've done everything from women's fiction to historicals to the traditional Harlequin romance. And I would imagine that writing each one of those different types of stories appeals to something different in you. And I wondered if you'd like to talk about that a little bit. What is the fun in doing these such a wide range of things?
Well, I think I like writing different genres because, you can get, I really like the emotional women's fiction I do, but it's quite draining. So to be able to switch from that to something lighter is kind of like a palate cleanser writing-wise. So I enjoy that. I started with writing classic Harlequin romance because I'd read those when I was a teenager. And to be perfectly frank, I really started writing those because I'd read that was the best chance of a steady income as a writer. And that's what I wanted. Yeah. But I enjoy the sort of being swept away element to them. But I'd probably say that my heart is really with the more emotional women's fiction, sort of the Jodi Picoult style writing.
Yes, and I was amused to see on one of your blogs that you were saying that, investing the time in the most recent book, I think, that you mentioned that it was a bit like thinking like Jodi Picoult for a change.
Yeah.
I can imagine the Harlequins are fun, though. They're probably only about 50,000 words, are they? Are those?
That's right.
You can get them done and have a sense of accomplishment.
Yes, which I did like when I started writing those about 10 years ago. And I had very young children at the time, and they were manageable. And, it was a good, steady writing income. I think I've written about 60 now, and I am getting a bit tired of the formula. So I probably will, taper off with those. But they've been great while I've been writing them.
You must have seen quite a change in the whole Harlequin field while you've been doing them too, because romance has changed a tremendous lot in that decade, hasn't it?
Yes, and publishing has changed a lot, with the advent of self-publishing and digital publishing. It's really, in the last 10 years since I've been writing full-time, it's really changed. And, I think as an author, the challenge is just to adapt and, be able to write what is important to you, but also just to stay current and know what's going on.
Yeah. So you've got probably more than one publisher, I guess, have you, for your different streams?
Yeah, I mean, I've been with various publishers throughout the years, and right now I write for 4 publishers. So, yeah, lots going on.
Oh, that's pretty. Yeah, that would be very demanding in itself. Yeah, and some of your standalone women's fiction is written under the pen name of Catherine Schwartz, and I just wondered how that came about as well.
Yeah, that came about. Well, Catherine Schwartz is my real name. Kate Hewitt is my pen name, which I took when I began writing for Harlequin, because generally they encourage you to write under a pen name.
Yes.
And then when I wrote those historicals, they were really different from everything else I was writing. And so I thought it would be better to do it under a different name, and I wanted to use my own name for once. So that's how that happened.
So was the Immigrants trilogy, was that was done under Kate Hewitt, wasn't it?
Well, it was originally done under Catherine Schwartz as a magazine serial in the UK.
Oh, okay.
And then I extended it and self-published it under Kate Hewitt, since I was more well-known as Kate Hewitt. So
I see, yes. I've got the Kindle version with Kate Hewitt. That's why I was slightly confused for a moment. And while we're talking about that, I gather that is also based on some of your own family history, that one of the storylines for that, the first book anyway.
Yes, the first book is based on my great aunt, I think. And the letters in the book are real letters that we've kept in our family. So I was really intrigued by their romance and wanted to write about it. But the second and third book, I'm afraid, are completely fictionalized.
Oh, it's lovely. It's amazing to have had real letters, though, to be able to refer back to. And it was quite a lovely story of one of your forebears leaving Scotland to go to Canada and leaving a young woman behind with a promise that he was going to return.
Yes.
Well, to claim her hand. And there was all sorts of things that happened that tended to break them apart. It wasn't a smooth journey for the true lovers, so to speak. So, and of course, we take communication so much for granted, but when you're trying to imagine somebody in that period and dying to have news of somebody that they cared about greatly, you realize how lucky we are with the communication we have today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was part of what really struck me with that story, was there was no reliable mail service. It was just, you passed on a letter and hoped it eventually made its way to Canada, the settlement where they were. And so actually, they're in looking at the letters, sometimes they didn't get a letter from one another for a year and a half or something. So that I can imagine that would be really difficult.
Yes, right. Now, the Hartley by the Sea series seems to be one that's making your name at the moment. It's got prominence on your website. That's a series that's set in the Lake District, and I believe you lived in the Lake District during some of your time in England.
Yes, we lived in the Lake District for 4 years, and Hartley by the Sea is based on the village where we lived.
Great. Oh, that's wonderful. And then Rainy Day Sisters, the book 1 in the series, is a lovely story about 2 sisters who in different ways are trying to come to terms with a rather unsympathetic mother figure. And a lot of your stories, it seems to me, revolve around that human need to be loved and the equally human tendency to withdraw when you're hurt. And I wonder if you'd agree that is a theme that you return to again and again.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think, especially in writing romance, that the need to be loved and what keeps that from happening. I think probably I would say the two major themes is how loving involves risk, which is why I think people withdraw. And also, especially in my women's fiction, I really like to write about sort of redemption of difficult circumstances. So I think that comes out in a lot of my books.
So you've got the new one that's out this month, The Mother's Choice.
Yes.
Sounds like that sort of story. It's an emotional page-turner about the relationship between two women, one of whom gives the child up for adoption and the other of whom adopts the child. And you can see that on both sides there's room for a lot of heartache.
Yes. And I think that book is it's probably the most emotional that I've written. I really tried to write it so you could identify equally with both women. So I don't really like writing villains, as it were, or they're really both meant to be someone that you can relate to.
Yes, yeah. And I know that I also have really enjoyed the Willoughby Close series. I've read a number of them, not all 5, but I have read about 3 of them so far. And I was amused to see that somebody described them as feel-good snuggly, because you do really get grabbed by the characters. So I thought that your portrayal, for example, of the lady who's dying it's very touching, and the whole community is sort of rallying around her. So yeah, it's really beautiful, but nice. It's not depressing. That's the thing. It's feel good, as well.
Yes, I know sometimes people review those books and say that they're good light reading, and I think, well, they're not that light, because they do have at the center of the story is someone dying.
Yeah, that's right. Or recovering from a difficult sort of criminal background, or they do touch on some quite tough themes as well. Right. Now, I think you were first published in 1999, I think.
Yes.
But when I look back, mostly what's on around now is from 2010. So I wondered about that first 10 years of your career. Were you spending that time finding your voice, doing a lot of work for magazines, or?
Yeah, that's right. For those 10 years, I was pretty much writing short stories and serials for magazines, which was really a great way for me to get into the business, because I had a lot of young children at home, and I could only write in the evenings for a short period. So being able to write a short story in an evening or two and send it off was really satisfying. I didn't really want to attempt a book at that point, because I was worried I'd spend, a year or 2 writing a book and nothing would happen with it. And I just didn't want to make that kind of commitment. So, yeah, for about 10 years I wrote, I'm not sure, but probably about 400 short stories that were published mainly in the UK, but also in Australia and the United States and South Africa. And it was a really good experience at honing my craft and learning to plot very tightly. And it was kind of like going to graduate school for creative writing. Yeah,
great experience. Tell me, do those magazines still exist now? Could somebody do that now?
Yeah. I mainly wrote for the People's Friend in the UK, which is still going. And I still actually write serials for them, just sort of out of loyalty, because they gave me my first break. And Women's Weekly, again, that's a magazine that's still around. So, yeah, it's not as it once was. I think probably the heyday was in I don't even know, maybe the 50s and 60s, when a lot of magazines had a short story space. And they tend to be taken out now by sort of reality TV type stories. But yeah, there's still a market there. And a lot of romance writers and women's fiction writers in the UK, at least, can get their start by writing short stories.
Yeah, that's great. Well, perhaps moving on away from specific books to a slightly wider view of your career, is there one thing you've done more than any other that you would see as the secret to your success?
Well, I think what I tell aspiring authors is to finish something, because I think often when you're not published, what I did at the start was I wrote a couple chapters of something, and then I thought, oh, this isn't really good, I'm going to do something else. And I think once you actually finish a book, even if it's terrible, it really gives you a sense of confidence. And so, and you feel that you realize you can do it and you keep doing it. So I think finishing books before I was published, and then also persevering through rejection, through poor sales, through publishers dropping you, it's up and down. It's not, you don't sort of make it and then it's smooth sailing for the rest of your career. So I think just plodding on and writing even when things aren't going well is probably what I would say the secret to my success is.
Yeah. And you have tried your hand at self-publishing along the way, I guess, haven't you? You mentioned the Immigrant series.
I self-published a bunch of serials that I'd written for The People's Friend, and I adapted them to be a bit longer, to be novels. And that was sort of when the self-publishing was really getting going. And I think sort of another secret to my success is adapting and seeing what is working, because things are changing all the time, I think, faster and faster. And so if something isn't working and your books aren't selling, I try to look and see what I need to do to sell better. And at that point, self-publishing seemed like a pretty good deal. It's not so much anymore for me, but it was for a little while.
Yeah, it's once again, people are talking as if the marketplace is just becoming so much more filled with other writers that it's hard to get yourself known.
Yes, really hard now. And even hard, for someone who, I wouldn't say my name is super well recognized, but, every book I write it's harder and harder to make a mark with it. So that can be a little discouraging, but, you just have to keep trying.
Sure. This is a funny little question that I noticed in Goodreads, but I thought it was fun. We might have already answered it, mind you, with our story about your great-great-great aunt or uncle, but is there a mystery in your own life that you could make a plot line or a romance line for a story?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I would say there's one thing in my history, which is that my great-grandfather changed his name when he came to America from England, and we don't know who he was before or why he changed his name. And when his children asked him about it, he just said, "I haven't done anything to be ashamed of." And so that's been a mystery in our family. No one's been able to find out why he changed his name or what his name was before. So that would be something that I think would be an interesting story to write sometime.
Most definitely. So you just, the family line, as far as you can tell, stops there because you don't know who his parents were.
No, we don't know what his real name was or anything, and we haven't been able to find out anything. So it's quite. I think if I wrote it, it would be, completely made up because there's no information.
Yeah.
But another thing that actually I used in a story in my book, A Second Bride, which was written as Catherine Swartz. When we lived up in the Lake District, we had a fire in the top floor of our house. And when the workmen came to repair the floor, they found a death certificate hidden under the floorboards from 1870, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I used that as the catalyst of my story. So I made up the reason why this death certificate would be hidden under the floorboards. But that was kind of interesting.
Oh, yes, indeed, it was. So do you think that you're living proof that, I hate that expression really, that women can have it all, but I'm sure that you've come across it in your life. And do other women sort of look at you a little bit disbelieving, like, how on earth can you do it all? It shouldn't be allowed. Do you get that little bit?
Yes, definitely. I get this. I think having 5 children, people sort of assume you're an expert at parenting when in fact, I'm just like anyone else, just trying to figure it all out. And I don't think anyone can have it all. I think you're always going to compromise, and make sacrifices in some way, and there's been times when I've put my work first too much, and then times when I, have just not been able to do career-wise what I would have liked to do. So, I think it's always a balancing act, and I'm just like anyone else trying to get it right, not always succeeding.
Yeah, I can imagine. Just reverting a little bit to that mystery in your own life, I was noticing that your husband is somebody that you've known for a very long time, and I thought there might be a story there because you were together very young, weren't you?
Well, we got married in our early 20s, but I knew him since I was a child because he was friends with my brother.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we didn't actually start dating until after I finished university. So, yeah, I was just the annoying little sister as, growing up.
Yeah. And that was in Canada, was it?
No, that was in the United States. I'm Canadian, but my parents moved to the United States before I was born, and then back to Canada when I went to university.
Oh, okay, great. Look, turning to Kate as the reader, because this is called The Joys of Binge Reading, I wondered who your favourite binge reads were. I'm sure there's very little time for reading, but at some stage in your life you've probably had some favourites.
Yeah. Well, for romance, I really like Jessica Hart, who wrote for Mills and Boon, and I think she probably got me hooked on Mills and Boon when I was a teenager. And for women's fiction, I like Emily Giffin and Jodi Picoult, Jojo Moyes. I'll read all their books.
Mm-hmm.
I like to read psychological thrillers. So I'm trying to think of some authors I've read. I tend to just read whatever's sort of hitting the charts at the moment. And I like historicals as well. I really like C.J. Sansom. He writes Matthew Shardlake mystery series set in the Tudor times.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty eclectic. If I see a book and it looks good, I'll read it. I tend to prefer good stories as opposed to sort of literary musings.
Yeah. So you'd see yourself as a storyteller first, would that be right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sort of circling around to the beginning and the end, at this stage in your career, if you were doing it all again, is there anything that you would change about the way that things have gone?
That's an interesting question. Well, I suppose, I would have liked to sell more books, but that's not really up to me. So, yeah, I think I think I would have liked to have slowed down and taken more time with my books, because for the last few years, I've written probably 8 books a year, and it's just been sort of write one book, finish it, and start the next book the next day. And that's been quite hard, I think, both on me and my family, but also on the books themselves, just being able to write the best books that I want to write. So, yeah, trying to slow down and just, concentrate on each book as it happens.
Goodness me, 8 books a year. Give us an idea of what your disciplined life is like to allow that to happen.
Well, I'm fortunate in that I can write quite quickly, and I tend to write a pretty clean first draft. I mean, I do go back and revise, but I don't have to sort of pull the whole book apart or anything. But now that my children are in school, I can write for about 3 hours a day, unless I have other things on, which happens probably too often. But yeah, I think it's just being really focused and not sort of frittering away time on the internet and stuff. But when my kids were smaller, I was actually much more disciplined, because I would write, they were at home, they were crawling all over me, and I would still manage to write, while holding a baby and things, and I couldn't do that now.
How amazing, truly amazing. And 3 hours a day is very concentrated, but not huge hours. Have you found that you've got faster as you've got more? I mean, you have now done 60 books. I guess that is part of it, that you've just become very, very proficient at what you do.
Well, I think it's the thing is, if I thought about the story and I know where it's going, I can write very quickly. But if I'm still figuring it out and I'm not sure who the characters are, then it's very slow. So if it's going really slowly, the writing, I tend to think I need some thinking time, and I tend to take my dog for a walk, or do some cleaning, and just let myself mull over the story for a bit, because it's not quite where it needs to be.
Do you outline before you begin?
I do, but then I allow myself to deviate from it.
Yeah.
I generally have a picture of the end of the story, and I'm sort of writing towards that last scene.
Sure. And so how many words a day would you normally aim? Do you have a word count that you aim for?
I do. Yeah, I try to write 3,000 words a day.
So that's 1,000 words an hour. Wow, that is really motoring.
When it's going well, that's easily done. When it's not going well, it doesn't always happen.
Yeah. And have you ever used the talking, the Dragon software and tried to actually dictate a book?
Yeah, I tried it very briefly when I injured my hand and I couldn't type for a couple weeks. But I don't know. I mean, I've talked to friends who say it's really difficult at first, but then they get into it. But I found it really clunky in terms of when I type, it's sort of bypassing a certain part of my brain almost, and the words are just sort of flowing out. And when I had to speak them, it began to feel very awkward.
Yeah.
But maybe if I tried more, it wouldn't be so awkward. I don't know.
So that injury wasn't RSI?
No, I actually got hit by a car and hurt my finger. So
wouldn't be surprising with the amount of work that you seem to be doing. But so what is next for Kate the writer? What have you got new projects under development?
Yes, I'm writing a Christmas novella that's set in the Willoughby Close world that will be out in October, called Cupcakes for Christmas. And then I'm also finishing the latest series that I was writing, a vicarage, the series set in a vicarage in the Lake District called A Vicarage Wedding. And then I'll be writing another book similar to A Mother's Goodbye for my new publisher, which I haven't even thought about yet, but it will be happening soon.
And those, are you hoping to get all of those finished before the end of the year?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. We'll see.
Do you ever have time for holidays?
Yes, I try. I actually try to take off the month of August since my kids are off school. It doesn't always happen, but yeah, that's the goal.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. Well, Kate, where can readers find you online?
Yes, you can. Well, my website, kate-hewitt.com. I'm on Twitter as Kate Hewitt 1. I have a Facebook page, Kate Hewitt Author, and I'm usually posting on that. So those are probably the 3 best places.
And you do have time to do social media as well as everything else?
A little bit, not much, but, I probably post one thing a day.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's hard. I mean, it takes up a lot of time, all these things.
And you have quite close contact with your readers?
Yes, yeah. I mean, if you write me on my Facebook page, which is how people usually contact me, or my email, I will try to respond to you within a day or two. And I love hearing from readers. It's always really, that's why you do it, to share your stories with people. And when people tell me that my story resonated with them, that's just incredibly gratifying. So I've been really pleased, in particular with my last story about adoption. Some people have written me to say they were adopted or they adopted a child, and they just really loved the story and were moved by it. So that's the best thing, to know you're touching people.
Yeah. Well, look, it's been wonderful talking. Thank you so much for making time, and all the very best with the future.
Thank you. You too, Jenny. Thank you very much.
Okay, my dear. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Joys of Binge Reading podcast. You can find all the details and links for this episode at www.thejoysofbingereading.com. We'd love to hear your comments and suggestions for who you'd like us to interview next. And if you enjoyed the show, take a moment to subscribe on iTunes or a similar provider so you won't miss out on future guests. Thanks for joining us, and happy reading.
The Joys of Binge Reading podcast is put together with fantastic technical help from Dan Cotton and Abe Raffles. Dan is an experienced sound and video engineer who's ready and available to help you with your next project. Seek him out at dcaudioservices@gmail.com. That's D for Daniel, C for Charlie, audioservices@gmail.com, or check our show notes. He's fast, he takes pride in getting it right, and he's great to work with. Our voiceovers are done by Abe Raffles, another gem of sound and screen. Abe has 20 years of experience on both sides of the camera/microphone, as a cameraman director and also as a voice artist and TV presenter. I think you'd agree that his voice is both light-hearted and warm. He is super easy to work with no matter what the job. You'll find him at Abe, A-B-E, at pointandshoot.co.nz. As I say, the Full details in the show notes on the website. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Hopefully see you next week. Bye.